The rain had stopped an hour ago, but Marcus Caldwell's hands still trembled. He knelt in Georgetown mud before a granite headstone that bore a stranger's name. Richard Sterling,
Look
husband to
closely
a
at the
woman he'd
inscription.
never met, father to no one.
I see it.
The wilted daisies cost $48. 2 days of sawing oak and sanding maple reduced to dying petals that wouldn't last the week. Dylan stood 3 feet behind, clutching the teddy bear that had survived everything else. 8 years old now, small for his age, the kind of thin that came from a body that had fought too hard for too long. His Seahawks jersey hung loose over jutting collarbones. October wind cut through the cheap fabric like it wasn't there. The watch caught the light. Patek Philippe Calatrava 18-karat gold, the kind of timepiece Marcus had only seen in magazine ads while waiting for his truck's oil change. It sat heavy on his wrist, worth more than his F-150, his tools, and 6 months of rent combined. The engraving gleamed RS. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold stone. The words came like they always did, automatic as breathing. "Thank you." A voice sliced through the October stillness, cold and precise as a scalpel. "That's my husband's grave. Who are you and why are you wearing his watch?" Marcus's head jerked up. The woman stood 15 feet away, positioned between him and the cemetery path like she'd materialized from the gray Seattle sky. Burberry coat, black as the headstone, not a thread out of place despite the wet earth. Her hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked painful. Behind Dior sunglasses, eyes the color of winter assessed him the way an accountant might examine a discrepancy. A Mercedes S-Class sat on the access road, engine still ticking. Dylan's fingers found Marcus's sleeve. The boy had inherited his mother's radar for danger, that sixth sense that told you when someone saw you as a problem to be solved. Marcus stood slowly, aware of the mud caked on his Wrangler jeans. The way his flannel shirt had seen better years. The calluses that no amount of lotion could soften. He stood 6'1" but felt smaller under her gaze. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to intrude." The words stuck in his throat. $48 in flowers, and he sounded like he was apologizing for stealing them. "We come here sometimes to say thank you." "Thank you." She repeated the phrase like it was in a foreign language. One gloved hand reached up, pulled the sunglasses down. Her eyes weren't winter, they were ice. "My husband died in a car accident 2 years ago, alone in the rain on his way back from a business meeting. So tell me exactly what you think you owe him thanks for. And while you're at it, explain why you're wearing his watch." The Patek Philippe burned against Marcus's wrist. He looked down at the initials that matched the name carved deep in granite and felt his chest constrict. How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? How do you tell a widow that her husband saved your son's life when she clearly believes no such thing ever happened? Dylan's small hand slipped into his, warm, alive. Evidence. "My name is Marcus Caldwell." Each word felt like lifting something heavy. "This is my son, Dylan. 2 years ago, your husband paid for Dylan's heart surgery. $300,000. We didn't know who he was until after—" His voice caught. "Until after he died." The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind those ice-chip eyes. Not belief. Something colder. Suspicion edged with fury. "The hospital said it was anonymous. But then we got this." Marcus lifted his wrist, showed her the watch, the gold catching weak sunlight through clouds. "And a letter. In your husband's handwriting. That's how we learned what happened to him. That's why we come here." Victoria Sterling, because that's who she had to be, stood very still. For 30 seconds, the only sound was a crow calling from the tree line and Dylan's quiet breathing. Then she laughed. Sharp, bitter, the sound of glass breaking. That's an interesting story, Mr. Caldwell. Very touching. But my husband's accounts were all accounted for. His lawyer handled everything after the accident. There was no... She stopped mid-sentence. Marcus saw it, the flicker of doubt or maybe memory crossing her features. Her hand moved to her phone, already pulling it from her pocket. I'm calling security. Please. The word came out barely louder than the wind. Just check. 2 years ago, 5 days before the accident, a withdrawal for $300,000. Your husband told you it was for an urgent business investment, didn't he? He saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. Her finger hovered over the phone screen. Check with Mercy General Hospital, the pediatric cardiac unit. They'll have records of an anonymous donation that covered Dylan's surgery. October 15th, 2022. They'll have the date, the amount, everything. The woman's finger didn't move. She looked at Marcus, really looked this time, taking in the work-worn hands, the faded denim, the exhaustion carved into lines around eyes too young to have them. Then she looked at Dylan, who watched her with the solemn attention of children who've spent too much time in hospitals. Dylan's jersey had ridden up slightly. Marcus saw the moment she noticed the scar, pale against skin that didn't see enough sun, running 6 inches down the center of his sternum. The unmistakable mark of open-heart surgery. Her expression shifted. The certainty drained like water through a sieve. Victoria Sterling. She lowered the phone without making the call. Her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something more dangerous. Confusion mixed with a desperate need to understand. If what you're saying is true, if Richard really did this, then I need to know everything because my husband and I... She stopped, seemed to reconsider her words. We had no secrets, or so I thought. Bitterness crept back into her tone, but this time it was directed inward. Start from the beginning, Mr. Caldwell. Don't leave anything out. Marcus glanced down at Dylan, who nodded solemnly. The boy understood in the way children sometimes do when adults need something from them, that this moment mattered, that the woman standing before them needed their story as much as they'd once needed Richard Sterling's money. Marcus took a breath, tried to organize 2 years of gratitude and grief into something coherent. The cemetery felt very quiet, as if even the birds had stopped to listen. Dylan was 6 when he got sick. His hand rested on his son's shoulder, felt the bone too close to the surface. Heart defect, congenital. The doctors said he probably had it since birth, but it didn't become critical until that winter. The memory pulled at him like undertow. Dylan getting tired all the time, unable to run without getting winded. At first, Marcus thought it was a cold, maybe flu, the kind of thing that cleared up with rest and soup. By the time I got him to the hospital, they said his heart was failing. Tetralogy of Fallot, 4 holes in the chambers. He needed surgery immediately or he wouldn't. The sentence stuck. 2 years later, and he still couldn't finish it. Victoria listened without interrupting. She'd moved closer, standing just a few feet away, now her focus entirely on Marcus's words. The phone remained in her hand, but forgotten. The doctor gave me an estimate. $287,000 for the surgery. Another $13,000 for recovery and monitoring. $300,000 total. Not counting follow-up care or medications or anything after. The numbers still had the power to hollow him out. He remembered sitting in that financial counselor's office, the woman's kind eyes. Her gentle voice explaining that they needed to make decisions about quality of life versus extending suffering. She didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what she meant. She meant your son is going to die and you can't afford to stop it. I had $8,000 in savings, 10 years of carpentry work. The hospital's charity fund could cover maybe $40,000 if we qualified. My insurance, he laughed hollow. Basic plan from the contractor I work for. Covered 15,000, maybe. Dylan leaned into his side, warm, solid, alive against all odds. I remember sitting there trying to do the math. If I sold my truck, my tools, the house, trying to make the numbers add up, knowing they never would. Victoria had gone very still. Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, some instinctive gesture of distress. And then? Her voice came quiet, like she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Then a miracle happened. Marcus said it simply because there was no other word. 3 days after that meeting, the financial counselor called me back. She said a donor had come forward through the hospital's charity foundation. Anonymous. Complete coverage for the surgery and 6 months of follow-up care. He let out a breath that felt like it had been held for 2 years. I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake or a program I didn't know about. But she said no. One person, one check, $300,000 made out to the hospital on Dylan's behalf. For my son. From someone I'd never met. Victoria's knuckles had gone white where she gripped her phone. 300,000. She repeated the number, slowly testing its weight. Richard withdrew that exact amount, October 15th, 2022. He told me it was for a property deal that needed to close immediately. A Bellevue investment that couldn't wait. Her voice stayed carefully controlled, but Marcus heard the tremor beneath it. I remember because I questioned it. We usually discussed larger investments together, but he said the opportunity couldn't wait. That he had to move fast or lose it. A pause. And I trusted him. I always trusted him. Marcus nodded, understanding the betrayal she must feel, even if it was different from any betrayal he'd experienced. When you're desperate and someone saves you, you don't question their motives. But when you're the person kept in the dark, every secret feels like a wound. We didn't know who the donor was. The hospital kept it completely confidential. Dylan had his surgery, 8 hours. It was successful. The relief still felt fresh, like touching something hot. We spent 2 weeks in recovery. And I kept thinking about this person who'd saved my son's life. This stranger who'd given us everything without asking for anything back. His voice grew softer, remembering those nights in the hospital. Dylan sleeping fitfully with machines beeping their steady rhythm. Marcus wide awake, trying to imagine the face of their guardian angel. I wanted to thank them, to tell them what their gift meant, but there was no way to reach them. No name, no contact, nothing. Until the watch. Victoria's eyes had fixed on his wrist again, but the fury was gone. Now she just looked lost. Marcus lifted his arm slightly so the afternoon light caught the gold, made the initials glow. Those 2 letters that had turned into an anchor, a lifeline, a thread connecting them to a man they'd never really known. 1 week after we came home from the hospital, a package arrived. He pulled his wallet from his back pocket, the leather cracked from years in his hip pocket. From it, he extracted a piece of paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded countless times. Inside was this watch and a letter. He held it out to Victoria. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her hand shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Victoria's breath caught. Marcus saw recognition flash across her face, the bold, slanted script she must have seen on birthday cards, on notes left on the kitchen counter, on legal documents that divided Richard's empire with mathematical precision after his death. She read silently first, lips moving slightly. Then, as if forcing herself to hear the words aloud, she spoke them into the October air. Dear Dylan, I hope you're feeling better. The doctors tell me your surgery was a success, and I'm so glad to hear it. I want you to have this watch. It belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me. 3 generations of sterling men have worn it. Now it's yours. Her voice wavered but held. This watch is meant for someone who will make the most of the time they're given, someone who will live with purpose, someone who won't waste the precious years like I've done. Live well, Dylan. Be kind. Make every second count. You're braver than you know. Your friend Richard Sterling. Victoria's voice broke on her husband's name. She added almost too quiet to hear. P.S. Take care of your father. I saw the pain in his eyes. It's the kind that can only be healed by a child's love. Her hands dropped to her sides, the letter hanging loose in her fingers. She stared at the headstone as if seeing it for the first time, as if the name carved there might offer some explanation for this revelation that rewrote everything she thought she knew. He never told me. The words came thick with unshed tears. 2 years. We were married 2 more years after this, and he never said a word. She looked up at Marcus, and he saw raw hurt in her eyes. Why wouldn't he tell me? Why would he keep this secret? Marcus had no answer. He'd wondered the same thing during sleepless nights after they'd learned who Richard was. After the initial joy of Thanksgiving had been swallowed by the news of his death. I don't know. Honesty was all he had to offer. Maybe he thought you wouldn't approve. Maybe he wanted it to be something just for him without any recognition or credit. He hesitated, then added gently, or maybe he was protecting you from something. I don't know what your marriage was like, but I know what he did for my son. That kind of generosity doesn't come from nowhere. Victoria's laugh was sharp and painful. Our marriage. She turned away from them both, her gaze sweeping across the cemetery as if searching for answers among the headstones. You want to know about our marriage? The question hung in the air, rhetorical and raw. We tried to have children for 10 years. Every treatment, every specialist, every last hope. Nothing worked. IVF 6 times, surrogacy twice. $120,000 in years of my body being treated like a science experiment. All for nothing. The admission hung between them, too intimate for strangers. But she seemed unable to stop now that she'd started. After a while, we stopped talking about it. We stopped talking about a lot of things. Richard buried himself in work. I did the same. We became, she searched for the word, efficient. Our marriage became a well-run business partnership, professional, courteous, utterly empty. Marcus felt like he was witnessing something he shouldn't. This wasn't what he'd come here for. He'd come to lay flowers, say thank you, and leave, not to become the confessor for a widow's grief. But Victoria wasn't finished. When he died, I felt relief. The words came out hard, forced through gritted teeth. Do you understand? I was sad, yes, but also relieved. Because at least then I didn't have to keep pretending that everything was fine, that we were fine. She turned back to face them, eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. And now you're telling me that while I was drowning in that empty house, in that empty marriage, my husband was out here playing guardian angel to strangers, saving children, being the father he always wanted to be. That he... Her voice broke completely. Dylan had been quiet through all of this, absorbing words he didn't fully understand, but sensing the grief that permeated them. Now he stepped forward, tugging free of Marcus's grip. He walked right up to Victoria, his small face serious and thoughtful. Before anyone could stop him, he held out his teddy bear, the one that had survived his mother's death, his own near-death, 2 years of hospital visits and nightmares. You can hold Buttons if you're sad. He makes me feel better when I miss people. The gesture was so pure, so unexpected that Victoria's careful composure finally cracked. She dropped to her knees, heedless of the mud, and took the offered bear with shaking hands. Thank you. The words came out as a whisper, and Marcus heard in those 2 syllables all the grief and regret and complicated love she'd been holding back. Dylan patted her shoulder awkwardly, the way Marcus had taught him to comfort people who were hurting. The boy stood there, a small anchor of warmth in the cold space between them before stepping back to his father's side. Victoria remained kneeling, clutching the worn bear, her perfect facade broken. Marcus realized they weren't so different after all. Both of them left behind by Richard Sterling in different ways. Both of them trying to make sense of a gift they hadn't asked for and couldn't repay. The cemetery had grown darker, clouds gathering again overhead. A few drops of rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, but none of them moved. Victoria slowly stood still, holding Dylan's bear. Her coat was marked with mud at the knees. She looked at the grave, at the flowers Marcus had brought, at the drawing Dylan had made that still lay folded in Marcus's pocket undelivered. When she spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, more vulnerable than before. "I need to see proof. Not because I don't believe you, though I think part of her still didn't, but because I need to understand. I need to see the records, the timeline, the letters, all of it." She looked at Marcus directly. "I need to know who my husband really was, because right now I don't think I ever did." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "Yes, of course, whatever you need." He pulled the drawing from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. Dylan's careful second-grade printing covered the page. 3 stick figures, a tall man with a halo drawn in yellow crayon, a shorter man, and a small boy between them. Above them, Dylan had written in letters that took up half the page. "Thank you, Mr. Richard, for saving my dad's heart, too." Victoria took the drawing, studied it. Her thumb traced over the words over the crayon-drawn halo. "Your dad's heart, too?" she asked softly, glancing up at Marcus. Heat crept up his neck. Dylan answered before he could. "Because Daddy was always sad before. After Mommy went to heaven. But after you saved me, he smiled again. So you saved both our hearts." The child's logic was simple and absolute. Children saw things so clearly, sometimes cutting through complexity to reach the truth underneath. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. She carefully folded the drawing and held it close along with the letter Marcus had given her and Dylan's teddy bear. 3 small pieces of evidence that her husband's last years hadn't been as empty as she'd believed. "I live 20 minutes from here, Sterling Manor in Medina." She pulled a business card from her coat pocket, handed it to Marcus. "Victoria Sterling, CEO, Sterling Tech Solutions." An address that Marcus recognized as one of Seattle's most expensive neighborhoods. "I'd like you both to come with me. I have Richard's personal papers, his journals. Maybe together we can understand why he did this, why he kept it secret." She paused, then added with brutal honesty, "And maybe you can help me figure out who the man I married actually was, because right now I'm not sure I ever really knew him." Marcus looked down at Dylan, who nodded eagerly. The boy was cold, his thin jacket insufficient against the returning rain, but his eyes were bright with curiosity and something else. Hope, maybe, that the story of the man who'd saved him might finally be complete. Marcus made a decision. "Okay, we'll follow you." Victoria nodded, already moving toward the parking lot, but Marcus held back for a moment, pulling Dylan close. Together they knelt by Richard's grave one more time. "Thank you." Marcus whispered the words again, the ones he spoke every visit, but this time he added something new. "Thank you for bringing us here, for leading us to her. I think—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I think maybe you knew she'd need us someday the way we needed you." Dylan pressed his small hand against the cold granite, a goodbye and a promise at once. Then they stood, turned away from the grave, and walked toward whatever answers waited in the house of a stranger, who was somehow becoming less strange with every passing moment. The drive felt longer than 20 minutes. Marcus followed Victoria's sleek Mercedes in his Ford F-150, a 2008 model with 180,000 miles and a slow oil leak he kept meaning to fix. The contrast wasn't lost on him as they moved from Lakeview Cemetery onto I-90 East past the floating bridge taking the exit toward Medina. Dylan hummed quietly beside him, drawing shapes in the condensation on the window. The boy seemed content, unbothered by the strangeness of following a widow to her mansion. Children adapted in ways adults couldn't. Marcus's mind churned. What were they doing? Victoria Sterling lived in a different world. The kind of world Marcus only saw on television or in magazines at the grocery store checkout. Medina. That's where Bill Gates lived, where tech billionaires built compounds with private beaches on Lake Washington. Georgetown, where Marcus rented a small house, had trailer parks and auto repair shops and corner stores that stayed open all night. Different universes separated by 20 minutes and a lifetime. The truck shuddered slightly as he accelerated. The oil leak left small dark spots wherever he parked. He'd see them later in Victoria's pristine driveway and feel the weight of every choice that had led him to 35 years old with a vehicle held together by hope and duct tape. "Are we going to her castle?" Dylan's voice cut through his thoughts. "Not a castle, buddy, just a house, a very big house where very rich people live. Like a castle." Dylan decided, and Marcus didn't have the heart to argue. They turned onto Evergreen Point Road. The houses grew larger, set back behind gates and hedges. Waterfront properties with private docks. Lawns that looked like golf courses. The Mercedes ahead slowed, signaled turn through iron gates that opened automatically. Sterling Manor. The name was engraved on a stone pillar. Marcus followed his truck, looking absurd next to the Mercedes parked in the circular driveway. He pulled to a stop, shut off the engine. Oil dripped onto cobblestones that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, suddenly unsure. "We don't belong here, do we, Dad?" Dylan's voice was small. Marcus wanted to say they did. That money didn't matter, that they had every right to be here. But he'd never lied to his son, and he wouldn't start now. "No, we don't. But sometimes you end up places you don't belong, and you just have to be respectful and do your best. Come on." They climbed out. The house rose before them, 12,000 square feet of modern architecture, stone and glass angles that caught the gray afternoon light. Gardens stretched on both sides, perfectly manicured despite the season. A tennis court was visible to the left. To the right, a guest house that was larger than Marcus's entire home. Dylan's hand found his small and cold. Victoria waited on the stone steps. She'd removed her heels, stood in stockinged feet. The gesture made her slightly less intimidating, slightly more human. She held Dylan's bear carefully, like it was precious. "Come in. Don't worry about your shoes. The stone cleans easily." A lie of kindness, probably. But Marcus appreciated the effort. They followed her inside. The entryway alone could have fit his living room and kitchen combined. Marble floors, a chandelier that must have weighed 200 pounds. Abstract art on the walls that Marcus didn't understand but assumed cost more than his truck. "This way." Victoria led them down a hallway lined with photographs. Marcus found himself studying them as they passed. Richard and Victoria at a technology gala, 1918, according to the placard. Evening gown, tuxedo, champagne, smiles for the camera. But their eyes, Marcus saw it even in a photograph, their eyes didn't smile. Another frame. Charity event 2019. Richard and Victoria handing an oversized check to Seattle Children's Hospital. $500,000. They stood 6 inches apart, both looking at the camera instead of each other. Professional. Polished. Empty. Company IPO 2020. Celebration. Success. Richard looked at the camera. Victoria looked at the floor. Dylan's whisper cut through Marcus's observations. They don't look happy like you and Mom did in our Christmas pictures. You're right, buddy. Sometimes people smile on the outside but feel sad on the inside. Victoria stopped walking, turned. She'd heard. Dylan is very perceptive. Her voice was thick. He's right. We weren't happy. Not for a long time. She continued walking, leading them to a staircase that curved up to the second floor. Marcus noted the absence of certain photographs. No wedding pictures except one small frame visible through an open door, no vacation photos, no candid shots of laughter or intimacy or casual moments that filled normal people's homes. Richard's office is upstairs. Victoria's voice echoed slightly in the cavernous space. I haven't changed anything since he died. I couldn't bring myself to go through his things. It felt like... She paused on the landing, like invading his last bit of privacy. They reached a door at the end of the hall. Victoria pulled a key from a chain around her neck. She'd been wearing it for 2 years. Marcus realized, unable to use it until now. The office was smaller than Marcus expected, still large by his standards, but somehow more intimate than the rest of the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls filled with business texts, philosophy, American history. A massive desk dominated the space, mahogany with hand-carved details. The chair behind it was genuine leather, an Eames design Marcus recognized from a furniture catalog he'd once studied, dreaming of pieces he'd never be able to afford. Everything was immaculate, no dust, but there was a feeling of abandonment, like a museum display of a life once lived. Victoria moved to the desk, to a locked drawer on the right side. The key fit smoothly. She opened it carefully, as if something inside might escape. I've never opened this. Her voice was barely audible. Even when Richard was alive. It felt like his sacred space, the one place I wasn't supposed to look. Marcus understood suddenly part of why their marriage had failed. Too much respect for privacy became a wall. Too much space became distance. They'd given each other room until there was nothing but emptiness between them. The drawer contained 12 journals, leather-bound moleskin notebooks with years embossed in gold on their spines. 2013 through 2024, a MacBook Pro, a folder labeled Personal, Do Not File, a photograph their wedding 2008, Richard and Victoria young and genuinely happy. A small bottle of aspirin. Victoria's hands trembled as she lifted out the journals. She found 2022, flipped it open. Her breathing changed as she scanned the pages, searching for a specific date. Dylan had settled onto a leather sofa by the window, still holding buttons. Marcus stood awkwardly, unsure where to put himself in this room full of a dead man's secrets. Victoria found what she was looking for. October 10th, 5 days before Richard's death. Her face changed as she read silently, from composed to shocked, to something that looked like grief mixed with rage. Listen to this. Her voice shook. She began to read aloud, and Marcus felt like he was witnessing something too private, too raw. But he couldn't leave, he had to hear. Today I saw something that broke me. A child, maybe 6 or 7, in the cardiac ward at Mercy General. I was there for a board of directors meeting discussing expansion of the cardiac unit. The meeting ended at 4. I got lost going back to the parking garage, went past the 3rd floor pediatric cardiac unit. Victoria's voice steadied as she focused on the words, letting them carry her. There was a man in the waiting room, early 30s, work jeans, flannel shirt, boots, hands calloused, someone who works with them. He sat alone, staring through the window into a hospital room. Inside, a boy, maybe 6, lay in bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. The heart monitor beeped slow, weak. Marcus felt the floor tilt. Richard had seen them that day, before the surgery was even approved. The man was crying, not loud crying, The silent kind, the crying of someone who's cried so much they have no tears left. His shoulders shook. His hands were clenched so tight the knuckles went white. Victoria paused, swallowed hard. I recognized that look. I've seen it in the mirror. I've seen it in Victoria's eyes every month after another IVF failure. It's the look of someone who's lost hope, of someone who knows they can't save the person they love most. The words landed like stones in still water. Marcus felt exposed, seen in a way he hadn't expected. That day in the waiting room, he'd thought he was alone in his grief. But someone had witnessed it. Someone had cared enough to do something about it. Victoria continued, her voice growing softer. I couldn't walk away. I stood there 10 minutes watching. Then I called the head nurse. The boy's name is Dylan Caldwell, 6 years old. Tetralogy of Fallot 4 congenital heart defects. Needs open heart surgery immediately or will die within 6 months. Cost $287,000 for surgery, $13,000 for ICU recovery, $300,000 total. She looked up at Marcus and he saw his own poverty reflected in her eyes. Family has $8,000. Insurance covers $15,000 minimum policy. Hospital charity fund $40,000 maximum if they qualify. Total available about $63,000. They need $237,000 more. Victoria's voice broke slightly. The financial counselor told the father, his name is Marcus Caldwell, that they should consider comfort care instead of aggressive treatment. In other words, let your son die comfortably instead of saving him. Because of $237,000. The amount sounded obscene when spoken aloud. Marcus remembered every digit, every calculation, every desperate attempt to make impossible math work out. Richard came home that night. Victoria set the journal down, looked at Marcus. I asked how his day was. He said fine. We ate dinner in silence, went to bed at different times, slept 3 feet apart in a California king. She picked up the journal again, and all night Richard wrote he could only think about that father in the waiting room, about the boy with 4 holes in his heart, about $237,000 being the difference between life and death. He listed what he'd spent that year on things that didn't matter. A Mercedes, a vacation to the Maldives where they barely spoke, wine collection, a Rolex he never wore. It came to more than $237,000. Victoria flipped forward 2 pages. October 12, 2022. I did it. I donated $300,000 through the hospital foundation, completely anonymous. They'll never know my name. They'll only know that someone cared enough to save their son. She read faster now, as if needing to get through it before losing courage. I told Victoria it was an urgent real estate investment, a Bellevue property that needed to close immediately. She asked a few questions but didn't dig deeper. We never dig deeper into anything anymore. The surgery is scheduled for October 15th. I won't be there. I won't meet them, but I'll know. And for the first time in 10 years, I feel like my life means something. The room fell silent. Marcus couldn't speak. Dylan had gone very still on the sofa, sensing the gravity, even if he didn't understand all the words. Victoria turned more pages, her movements almost frantic now. She found another entry dated October 18th, 2 days before Richard died. Dylan's surgery was successful, 8 hours. The doctors say he'll live healthy, heart, normal life. I sat in my office and cried. I didn't tell Victoria about Dylan because I'm a coward. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the words cut like wire. If I told her, I'd have to admit something. I found meaning in a stranger's child that I never found in our marriage. If I told her, she'd ask why I care more about a boy I've never met than about fixing what's broken between us. And I don't have an answer, except the truth. Victoria stopped, took a shaking breath. Saving Dylan was easier than saving us. With him, I could write a check. I could know I made a difference. The result was clear: he lives or dies. But with Victoria and me, no amount of money fixes the distance we've created. No surgery repairs a marriage that died 5 years ago, but we keep pretending is alive. She closed the journal, set it down with finality. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus watched Victoria Sterling sit in her husband's chair, surrounded by his books and his secrets, and saw her truly for the first time. Not as an intimidating CEO or a wealthy widow, but as someone just as lost as he'd been in that hospital waiting room 2 years ago. Our marriage was already over. Her voice was hollow. We just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. The admission hung in the air, stark and honest. Richard found meaning in you because he couldn't find it at home. I don't blame you for that. I don't even blame him, really. I blame us both for being too proud, too stubborn, too scared to admit we'd failed. Dylan slipped off the sofa, walked over to Victoria. He was small enough that standing put him at eye level with her seated form. He took her hand. Mr. Richard still loved you. I know he did. Victoria looked at this 8-year-old boy, this child her husband had saved, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. How do you know that, Dylan? Because he gave me his special watch to give to you. He said in the letter. Dylan's face scrunched in concentration, remembering. He said about not wasting precious years. He was sad he made you sad. People who don't love each other aren't sad like that. Out of the mouths of children. Marcus felt the truth of it, the simplicity that adults overcomplicated with their fears and pride and walls. Victoria pulled Dylan into a hug. The boy went willingly, patting her back the way Marcus had taught him. For a moment they stayed that way, a widow and the boy her husband had saved, connected by a gift neither had asked for. When Victoria released him, she looked to Marcus. Stay, please. It's late. Have dinner with me. Not because I want to investigate more. Because... Her voice cracked. Because I don't want to be alone in this house tonight. Marcus looked at Dylan, who nodded eagerly. We should go. Dylan has school tomorrow. Please. Just the one word, but it carried the weight of 2 years of solitude. Marcus recognized the loneliness because he'd lived in it. After his wife died before Dylan's surgery, he'd spent months in that gray space where days blurred together and the only thing that mattered was putting one foot in front of the other. Okay. But we're ordering pizza. Not anything fancy, just pizza. Victoria laughed, actually laughed, the first real sound of joy Marcus had heard from her. I've never ordered pizza delivery in my life. Dylan's eyes went wide. Never? That's so sad. And just like that, the tension broke. Victoria wiped her eyes, stood and led them back downstairs. She fumbled with her phone, trying to figure out how to order from Domino's while Dylan coached her through the app. Marcus watched this billionaire CEO struggle with something as simple as pizza delivery, and felt the first crack in the wall between their worlds. The pizza arrived 45 minutes later. They ate at a kitchen table designed for 12, just the 3 of them sitting close together at one end. Dylan told Victoria about school, about his friends, about the Heart Heroes Club he wanted to start for kids with surgery scars. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions, engaging in a way that suggested she'd forgotten how to do this, how to just be with people without agenda or armor. Marcus watched them and thought about Richard Sterling, about a man who'd saved Dylan but couldn't save himself, about how sometimes the hardest person to rescue is yourself. It was after 10 when Marcus finally said they had to leave. Dylan had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, worn out by the emotional weight of the day. Marcus carried him to the truck, the boy's arms wrapped loose around his neck. Victoria walked them to the door. She still held Dylan's bare buttons like she'd forgotten to give it back. Thank you for staying, for telling me everything, for... She struggled with the words. For showing me that Richard's last years weren't completely empty, that he found something good even if it wasn't with me. Marcus shifted Dylan's weight, felt his son's breath warm against his neck. He loved you. I don't know how I know that, but I do. Everything in those journals, he was looking for a way back to you. He just didn't know how. Victoria nodded, not quite believing but wanting to. Come back, please. I think... She paused. I think Richard brought us together for a reason. I don't know what it is yet, but I'd like to find out. Marcus thought about his workshop in Georgetown, about the custom furniture orders piling up, about the rent due in 2 weeks. He thought about Sterling Manor and the gulf between this world and his. He thought about how Dylan had smiled tonight, really smiled for the first time since his mother died. We'll come back. He settled Dylan into the truck, buckled him in. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. It caught rough like it always did, oil pressure light blinking before settling. As he pulled away, he saw Victoria in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of her enormous house, holding a worn teddy bear, looking smaller and more alone than anyone with that much money had a right to be. The drive home took them back through worlds, from Medina's waterfront estates to Georgetown's industrial blocks, from marble and glass to vinyl siding and chain-link fences. Marcus pulled into the driveway of his rental, a small house, 2 bedrooms yard, that needed mowing, porch light that flickered. He carried Dylan inside, laid him in bed, still dressed. The boy mumbled something about castles and pizza, then settled back into sleep. Marcus stood in the doorway of Dylan's room, watching his son breathe. Steady, strong, alive. The scar on his chest hidden beneath a Seahawks jersey. But Marcus knew it was there, proof of what they'd survived, proof that sometimes miracles happened. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Thank you for today, for Dylan, for letting me see Richard differently. I know I was cruel at first. I'm sorry. Victoria. Marcus typed back slowly, his calloused fingers clumsy on the screen. Nothing to apologize for. You were protecting yourself. We all do that. Thank you for listening, for believing us. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Same time next month at the cemetery. Marcus thought about it, about making this a routine, about tying his life to a woman who lived in a different stratosphere, about all the ways it could go wrong. Then he thought about Dylan's smile, about Victoria's laughter over pizza, about how Richard Sterling had seen them at their lowest and chosen to help anyway. Same time next month. He put the phone down, checked on Dylan one more time, went to his own room, the bed he'd once shared with a wife who died too young, the empty space he'd learned to live with. Tonight, for the first time in 2 years, the emptiness felt different. Not filled exactly, but less hollow, like maybe there was room for something new to grow in the spaces grief had carved out. He thought about Victoria in her mansion, probably sitting in Richard's office, reading more journals, learning more secrets. He thought about the watch on his wrist, ticking steadily forward, counting down seconds that used to feel endless but now felt precious. Tomorrow he'd go back to the workshop, sand oak, cut maple, build things with his hands, pay rent, buy groceries, live the same life he'd lived yesterday and the day before. But something had shifted. Some invisible thread now connected his small house in Georgetown to a mansion in Medina, connected a carpenter to a CEO, connected past grief to possible future something. Richard Sterling was dead. But somehow, through a watch and a letter and $300,000, he'd managed to bring together 2 people who needed each other in ways they didn't yet understand. Marcus fell asleep thinking about that, about how sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that keep giving long after the giver is gone. 2 weeks passed like water through a sieve. Victoria sent 3 emails, Short professional, each one reaching out across the gulf between Medina and Georgetown with careful words about honoring Richard's legacy, about continuing what he'd started, about needing Marcus's help to understand. Marcus replied to each one, polite, brief, evasive, swamped with orders right now. Sorry, not sure how I could help with something like that. You should work with professionals, people who know what they're doing. The truth sat heavier than the lies. Marcus was afraid of being pulled into a world where he'd inevitably fail, where his rough edges would show, where Dylan would get attached to someone who lived in a mansion and then lose her too. They'd said thank you. They'd shared one evening. That should be enough. Dylan asked every morning, every afternoon, every night before bed, "When do we see Miss Victoria again? She has her own life, buddy." But she was sad. We helped her feel better. Once. We helped once. That's all we can do. The boy's disappointment was a stone in Marcus's chest, but he told himself he was being smart, protective, keeping them safe in the small, manageable world they understood. Saturday morning found Marcus in his workshop hand-sanding a cherry dining table. The red-brown wood showed tiger stripes under his palm grain that would look stunning under oil finish. $800 for this job, a week's work. He'd built the entire piece by hand, no CNC machines, no automated tools. Just him, his grandfather's chisels, and patience earned through years of learning that perfection came from the slow accumulation of small, careful movements. The table saw had been quiet for an hour. NPR played classical music through speakers flecked with sawdust. Saturday meant Dylan did homework in the corner office Marcus had built from leftover plywood, and nobody interrupted. Except someone was knocking. Marcus straightened brushed wood dust from his flannel. Probably the restaurant owner coming to check progress. He pulled open the side door. Victoria Sterling stood on the cracked concrete, dressed wrong. Not wrong exactly. Different. Levi's instead of designer slacks. A cashmere sweater in charcoal gray instead of tailored blazers. White Converse instead of Louboutin heels. Her hair fell loose past her shoulders and she wore minimal makeup. "You've been avoiding my emails." Marcus's grip tightened on the doorframe. "I've been busy. So I came in person." From inside the workshop, a small voice squealed, "Miss Victoria!" Dylan appeared like a comet, homework abandoned, launching himself at Victoria with the fearlessness of children who hadn't yet learned about class divisions and appropriate boundaries. She caught him, stumbled slightly, then steadied and hugged him back. "I missed you. Did you come to see us? Are you staying? Dad said you were too busy, but I knew you'd come." Victoria's eyes met Marcus's over Dylan's head. Something complicated passed between them. Accusation, understanding, hurt, acceptance. "I missed you too, Dylan. I brought something for you." She pulled a folder from her shoulder bag, handed it to the boy. Inside were 3 drawings, professional quality, full color. Heart heroes, Dylan had called them in his crayon sketch, but these were rendered by someone who knew anatomy and art in equal measure. Children with surgery scars wearing capes flying through clouds. "I had a designer at my company make them. Based on your idea. I thought maybe you could hang them in your room." Dylan's face split into pure joy. He hugged the folder to his chest, looked up at Marcus with pleading eyes. "Can we, Dad? Can we hang them?" "Of course, buddy. Go inside and pick which walls." Dylan ran back into the workshop, leaving Marcus and Victoria alone in the doorway. Traffic hummed on the street behind her. Someone's radio played hip-hop from an auto body shop 3 doors down. "You shouldn't have done that." "I wanted to. Dylan's idea was brilliant. He should see it taken seriously." Marcus stepped aside, gestured her in. The workshop smelled like cedar and varnish and honest work. Victoria walked slowly, taking in the space. Her fingers traced the edge of the dining table, felt the smoothness of his sanding, the precision of mortise and tenon joints that held the legs without a single screw. This is beautiful. You made this by hand. Everything here is by hand. Can't afford the machines the big shops use. I couldn't do this even with machines. She turned to face him, and the admiration in her voice felt genuine. This is skill, patience, precision. It's art. It's carpentry, nothing special. Don't do that. Sharp, sudden. Don't diminish what you're good at. You have a gift. Own it. The words landed harder than intended. Marcus busied himself with putting away tools, uncomfortable with praise, with being seen. Why are you really here, Victoria? I want to create something. Jonathan's Heart Foundation, continuing what Richard started when he saved Dylan, but I can't do it alone. Hire experts, program directors, people with degrees in nonprofit management. I don't need experts. She moved closer, her voice gaining intensity. I need someone who understands what it feels like to sit in that hospital calculating whether selling everything you own might add up to enough. Someone who knows the difference between numbers on paper and actual human desperation. Marcus shook his head, dust motes swirling in the light from high windows. I don't know anything about running a charity. But you know people. I have money. You have heart. We need both. She pulled a paper from her bag. Official letterhead, job description, salary listed at the bottom. Co-Director of Family Services. $150,000 per year. Benefits. Flexible hours. The number was obscene. Marcus made $45,000 as a carpenter. This was more than triple, more than he'd ever dreamed of earning. Enough to get Dylan braces, fix the truck move to a better neighborhood, save for college. His hands trembled as he read it. Then he set it down on his workbench and stepped back. I can't accept this. Victoria's face registered shock. Why not? This is a real position. You'd be earning it, interviewing families, assessing needs, making recommendations. It's charity. The word came out harder than he meant. Richard saved Dylan because he wanted to, not because he expected me to owe him a job. If I take your money now, I'm just taking advantage of his generosity. I'm no better than... He stopped, but she finished the thought. Than someone exploiting the foundation. Yes. The silence stretched. Victoria's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to people refusing her offers, Marcus realized. Wasn't used to someone rejecting what looked like pure generosity. Then what do you want? The question hung between them. Marcus thought about Dylan, about Victoria's loneliness, about Richard's journals, describing a man who'd found meaning too late. I'll help you. Volunteer 1 evening a week, Fridays after 6. I'll review applications, meet families, give you my assessment. But no pay. If I do this for 6 months and prove I'm actually useful, if I earn the position, then maybe we talk about salary. 6 months without pay, you have a son, bills. I have carpentry, it's enough. But I need to know I'm not charity. I need to know I've earned whatever comes next. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Behind her, Dylan hummed while examining his drawings. Traffic continued outside. The world kept turning while these two people from different universes tried to find common ground. Okay, 6 months volunteer. But if you're good at this, and I think you will be, you accept the salary. Deal. Marcus extended his hand. Rough calluses met smooth skin. They shook on it, and something shifted in the air between them. Not friendship yet, not partnership, but the beginning of something that might become both. 3 months vanished into a rhythm. Friday evenings, Marcus would finish his carpentry work, pick up Dylan from the neighbor who watched him after school, and drive to the small office Victoria had rented in downtown Seattle. 800 square feet above a coffee shop, furnished simply. 2 desks, file cabinets, a worn sofa where Dylan did homework while the adults worked. Jonathan's Heart Foundation, Incorporated, $2 million in initial funding from Victoria's personal wealth. Logo designed by Dylan, a heart with wings professionally rendered by Victoria's design team. Mission statement written and rewritten until every word felt right. Saving children who need cardiac surgery but lack the financial means. Simple, direct, true. The first applications arrived slowly. Families who'd heard about them through hospital social workers, through support groups, through desperate internet searches. Each file told a story of medical bills that crushed dreams of insurance that covered almost nothing of parents forced to choose between saving their child and keeping their home. Marcus read each one like gospel. Victoria analyzed them like chess problems. Their methods clashed immediately. The Miller family file landed on the desk third week of January. Emily Miller, 9 years old. Leukemia relapse requiring specialized radiation therapy. $180,000. Father Thomas Miller, warehouse worker, had been fired 3 months prior for excessive absences. Victoria's red pen marked through the page. He's not reliable. Lost his job. That's a risk. Marcus's voice came tight. Or maybe he was missing work to take care of his dying daughter. Maybe his boss didn't care about sick kids. Maybe we should ask him instead of judging from a background check. I'm not judging. I'm assessing risk. We have limited funds. We can't waste them. Waste? The word tasted bitter. A 9-year-old with cancer is waste. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean that we only help perfect families with perfect credit scores because I had terrible credit when Richard helped us? I was behind on rent. If I'd applied to this foundation, would you have rejected me? Victoria went very still. That's different. I know you. Exactly. Someone gave me a chance before knowing me. Richard looked past the numbers and saw a father who needed help. That's what we have to do. The office felt too small suddenly. Dylan pretended not to listen from the couch, but his homework hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Victoria picked up her phone. I want to verify his story, if he was really fired for taking care of Emily, if that's the truth we approve. But I need proof. Then I'll get proof. Give me his address. Marcus drove to South Seattle the next day. The apartment building looked tired, peeling paint, cracked parking lot, but clean. Maintained by people who cared even when they had nothing. Thomas Miller answered on the second knock. 38, but looked 50. Exhaustion etched in lines around his eyes. They talked for an hour. Marcus saw the empty living room TV gone, sofa gone, everything sold except mattresses and Emily's stuffed animals. Saw the hospital bills stacked on the kitchen counter, each one stamped overdue. Saw Emily herself bald from chemotherapy playing quietly with a single worn doll. He drove back to Georgetown with rage burning in his chest. Not at Victoria. At a world where this was normal. Where fathers had to choose between jobs and children. Where 9-year-olds died because numbers didn't add up. That Friday, he walked into the office and dropped his notes on Victoria's desk. Thomas Miller missed work 15 times in 2 months. His daughter was in the hospital. He asked for leave without pay. They denied it. So he went anyway. They fired him. He sold everything he owns to pay for treatment. He's behind 4 months on rent. His landlord is about to evict them, but he's not trying to save his apartment. He's trying to save his daughter. Victoria read through the notes without speaking. Made a phone call, verified the story with Thomas's former employer. Hung up and sat back in her chair. You were right. Wire $180,000 to Swedish Medical Center for Emily Miller's treatment. Something loosened in Marcus's chest. Not victory, just the knowledge that they'd done right by one child. The Whitmore family came next. Mason Whitmore, 5 years old, needed a bone marrow transplant. $250,000. Parents ran a Greek restaurant in Fremont called Apollo's Tavern. Revenue reports showed $850,000 per year. Marcus frowned at the numbers. They're not poor, they can afford this. Victoria pulled up tax return spreadsheets, business documents Marcus didn't fully understand. Revenue isn't profit. Look, food costs, labor, rent, equipment, loans, by the time everything's paid, they net about $65,000 per year. Comfortable, but not wealthy. She showed him more documents. 3 years of Mason's leukemia treatment had cost $340,000. They'd mortgaged their home, drained retirement accounts. The restaurant was leveraged to the limit. They're rich in their front window and broke in their back office. The numbers tell the story if you know how to read them. Marcus looked at the spreadsheet, saw the truth he'd missed. I'm sorry, I judged too fast. And I judged Thomas Miller too fast. We balance each other, that's the point. They approved the Whitmore family. Wired $250,000. The foundation had helped 4 children in 3 months. Miller-Whitmore twin girls named Rodriguez who needed heart surgery, a teenager named James Wilson, whose dialysis costs were bankrupting his family. 4 children, $780,000. 780,000 reasons the foundation mattered. Friday nights became something Marcus looked forward to instead of enduring. Victoria ordered Thai food or Indian or Chinese, never pizza again, by mutual unspoken agreement to keep that first night separate. Dylan finished homework, then taught Victoria how to use Photoshop, showing her design basics while she fumbled through layers and filters with the intense concentration of someone used to mastering everything. Marcus watched his son laugh, watched Victoria's careful distance soften into something approaching ease, and thought maybe Richard Sterling had known what he was doing after all. April arrived wet and cold, 6 months since they'd met at the cemetery. Marcus had proven himself valuable enough that Victoria insisted on making the co-director position official and paid. He'd accepted $120,000 less than her initial offer, but enough that he could cut back on carpentry, could spend more time with Dylan, could stop calculating whether fixing the truck would mean skipping groceries. The Bryn Sullivan application arrived on a Tuesday. Single mother, 32, worked as a server at Applebee's. Daughter Harper, 7 years old, diagnosed with ventricular septal defect, a hole in the heart wall. Surgery cost $220,000. No insurance through her part-time position. Credit score of 480. 2 prior evictions. Collection accounts totaling $12,000. Bankruptcy filing from 2019 mentioning gambling debts. Victoria's red pen came out immediately. No. Too many red flags, we can't risk this. You're rejecting her because she has gambling problems. The daughter didn't gamble. Harper's 7 years old. I'm rejecting because I don't trust the mother will use the money properly. $220,000 could disappear into a casino instead of a hospital. Marcus felt heat rise in his neck. So we only help perfect victims' mothers without mistakes. That's not what Richard did. He helped us without knowing anything except that Dylan needed surgery. And maybe if he'd done due diligence, he would have found red flags with us too. Maybe that's why he kept it secret. He knew I'd have concerns. The argument escalated. Victoria talked about fiduciary responsibility. Marcus talked about the child who'd die without help. Neither could hear the other through the wall of their own certainty. Finally, Marcus played the card he'd been holding. If I'd applied to this foundation 2 years ago, you would have rejected me based on my credit score and late rent payments. You would have let Dylan die because I made mistakes. Is that who we are? Victoria's face went pale. The truth of it struck like a physical blow. Marcus pressed the advantage. I'll meet her, interview her in person, look her in the eye. If I think she's lying, we reject, but don't judge her on paper without giving her a chance. Victoria set down her pen with careful precision. Fine, but I want extra verification, home visit, references, Medical records confirmed directly with doctors. If you approve this, you own it. I'll own it. He drove to Renton on Saturday. The apartment complex was called Riverbend, which was optimistic given the cracked asphalt and peeling siding. Bryn Sullivan answered the door in an Applebee's uniform just off shift. Exhausted. Wary. Harper sat on a worn couch coloring. Small for 7. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She breathed with visible effort, each inhale slightly labored. The kind of thing you didn't notice unless you'd watched your own child struggle for air. They talked for 45 minutes. Bryn cried when explaining the gambling, a bad year after losing her job, depression, stupid choices that snowballed into debt. She was paying it off. $30 a week from tips would take years. But she was trying. I swear on everything, if you give us this money, it goes straight to the hospital. I won't touch it. I'll sign anything. Harper needs surgery by next year or her heart will fail. That's what the doctor said, and I can't. I don't have... Her voice broke. Harper looked up from coloring eyes too old for 7. Mommy's sad again. Marcus saw Dylan in that face, saw himself in Bryn's desperation, saw the whole terrible cycle of poverty and illness and impossible choices. He drove back to Seattle and walked into Victoria's office Monday morning. Approve it. I talked to her doctors. The VSD is real. Harper needs surgery. Bryn made mistakes, but she's trying. I believe her. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Then she signed the approval form. $220,000 wired directly to Mercy General Hospital under Harper Sullivan's name. It goes nowhere else. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. 2 weeks later, Victoria's phone rang at 9 in the morning. Marcus was in his workshop hand-planing a walnut bookcase when his phone buzzed. Victoria's text was a single sentence, "Call me now." He did. She picked up before the first ring finished. The hospital says they've never heard of Harper Sullivan. No patient by that name. No scheduled surgery, nothing. Marcus's stomach dropped into a void. That's impossible. I saw the medical records. Apparently those records were fake. Along with everything else, I have an investigator looking into it. I'll call you back. The call came 3 hours later. Marcus sat in his truck outside the workshop, unable to move, unable to think. Bryn Sullivan isn't her real name. It's Bryn Callahan. She's done this before. Small-time fraud. The medical records were forged. The apartment was rented specifically for the con. Harper isn't even her daughter, borrowed from a friend for photos. The $220,000 went to an intermediary account that disappeared. It's gone, Marcus, all of it. His vision tunneled. His breath came short. Gone. $220,000. Enough to save 3 children. 4, 5. Gone because he'd trusted someone. Because he'd looked into desperate eyes and seen himself. I'll call an emergency board meeting. Victoria's voice sounded hollow. The lawyers think we should shut down. Cut our losses before this becomes public. Victoria, you were right about Thomas Miller. You were right about seeing past the numbers. But you were catastrophically wrong about this, and now we're done. The foundation is done. Richard's legacy is... I'm sorry. The line went quiet. Then I know you are. So am I. She hung up. Marcus sat in his truck for an hour, watching rain start to fall, watching the world continue like nothing had changed when everything had. That Friday, he walked into the office for the last time. Victoria was already there, staring at Dylan's logo on the wall. The heart with wings seemed to mock them now. She turned when she heard him. Her face was composed, controlled, the mask back in place, but her eyes showed the truth devastation barely contained. The board wants to dissolve the foundation. The lawyers agree. We're liable for negligence, possibly fraud ourselves if donors think we weren't properly vetting. This is my fault. Yes. No softening, no comfort, just cold truth. This is exactly why we needed thorough vetting. why I wanted safeguards, why I— Her voice rose, control slipping. Why I told you this would happen. You with your instincts and your trust and your need to see the best in everyone. You got played, Marcus. You got played, and it cost us $220,000. I was trying to help by ignoring every red flag, by overriding my concerns because you wanted to be the hero, because you saw yourself in some con artist and couldn't separate your trauma from actual assessment. The words landed like hammer blows. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. At least I tried, at least I cared about people instead of just risk management, you. With your spreadsheets and your background checks and your perfect calculations. You don't see humans, you see potential losses. Because losses are real. Because every dollar we waste is a child we don't save. Because I have responsibility to donors, to the board, to Richard's memory. Her voice broke. Do you know what the difference between you and Richard is? He only had to save Dylan once. Then he died. But I have to live with every decision, every failure, every child we turn away because we ran out of money helping the wrong people. The silence after her words felt like falling. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, watching tears stream down Victoria's face while she refused to look away from him. Dylan's voice came small from the doorway. Dad! The boy had been waiting in the hallway, heard everything. His homework bag slipped from his shoulder papers, scattering. Marcus moved toward him, but Dylan stepped back. You're not supposed to yell at Miss Victoria. She's sad. You're making it worse. Shame burned through Marcus's anger. He'd done exactly what he'd taught Dylan never to do, hurt someone because he was hurting. You're right, buddy. I'm sorry. Let's go home. He gathered Dylan's papers, shouldered the bag, took his son's hand. At the door, he turned back. I quit. You were right. I don't belong here. I'm just a carpenter who thought he could do more. Marcus. But he was already gone, pulling Dylan down the stairs, out into the rain, into the truck that smelled like sawdust and failure. They drove home in silence. Dylan cried quietly, and Marcus had no words to make it better. He'd ruined everything. Proven Victoria right. Proven himself exactly what he'd always feared, inadequate for anything beyond sanding wood and cutting joints. Victoria stood alone in the office, staring at the logo Dylan had drawn. The heart with wings. The dream they'd built for 3 months and destroyed in 3 minutes. Her phone rang. The lawyer. We can probably recover some reputation if we shut down quietly. Issue a statement about unforeseen circumstances. Your personal wealth is protected. Do it. Her voice sounded dead even to herself. Close it all down. She hung up, sat in the chair Dylan usually occupied. Picked up one of his drawings from the floor where it had scattered Emily Miller, the first child they'd saved. Drawn in crayon with a heart labeled fixed. 4 children, $780,000. 4 lives changed. 4 families given hope. And now it was over, because she'd been right about the wrong person and Marcus had been wrong trying to be kind. Richard's watch sat in her desk drawer. She'd taken it from Marcus's wrist that first day in the cemetery, taken it home, kept it. Now she pulled it out. The initials caught the light, RS. What were you thinking? She asked. The watch asked the ghost, asked the universe that had brought them together just to tear them apart. What was the point of all this? The watch ticked on, counting seconds that felt like stones. Victoria sat in the empty office for 3 days, processing dissolution paperwork, fielding calls from disappointed board members, drafting statements about unforeseen circumstances and lessons learned. The coffee shop below stayed open until midnight. She worked until the lights went dark downstairs, then worked longer in the glow of her laptop screen. On the 4th day, her phone rang. Private investigator. Ms. Sterling, there's something you need to know about the Bryn Callahan case. She listened, put down her pen, listened more. Send me everything. The file arrived within the hour. Victoria read it twice, then called Marcus. He didn't pick up. She tried again. Voicemail. Marcus, it's Victoria. I found something. Bryn Callahan does have a daughter. Harper Callahan, 7 years old. She has VSD. Real diagnosis, real need. Bryn used her own child for the con, showed us genuine medical records, but then pocketed the money instead of paying the hospital. Harper never got treatment. She's in foster care now because Bryn's in jail awaiting trial. The child is real Marcus, and she's dying. She hung up, stared at the phone, waited. 20 minutes later, Marcus called back. Where's Harper now? Group home in South Seattle. Renton Family Services. I'll meet you there tomorrow, 9 a.m. The line went dead. No apologies, no reconciliation, just the mission. Maybe that's all they had left. The foster home occupied a converted craftsman on a street where lawns needed mowing and porches sagged under decades of Pacific Northwest rain. Marcus's truck arrived same time as Victoria's Mercedes. They nodded to each other across the driveway, acknowledgement without warmth, soldiers reporting for duty. Porting. Dylan climbed out of the truck uncertain. He hadn't spoken much since the fight. Hadn't asked about Victoria or the foundation or when they'd go back. Just withdrew into himself the way children do when adults shatter their small, safe worlds. A social worker met them at the door, 40s tired eyes, the look of someone who'd seen too many children slip through too many cracks. Harper's in the playroom. She doesn't talk much. Hasn't since her mother was arrested. The heart condition makes her fatigue easily, so she mostly sits and watches the other kids. The playroom held 6 children ranging from toddler to preteen. Toys scattered across worn carpet. A TV played cartoons no one watched. Harper sat in the corner, small even for 7, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better years. Blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, blue eyes that tracked movement without engaging. Dylan saw her and froze. Marcus felt his son's recognition there, but for grace went he. Dylan had been that child once, the sick one, the different one, the kid who couldn't keep up. Hi. Dylan's voice came quiet as he crossed the room. I'm Dylan. That's my dad Marcus, and that's Miss Victoria. We came to see you. Harper looked at him without speaking. Dylan sat down cross-legged in front of her, not too close, giving space. I like your rabbit. What's his name? Nothing. I have a bear named Buttons. He's really old and one eye is loose, but I love him anyway. Is your rabbit old too? Harper's fingers tightened on the rabbit's ears. A nod barely perceptible. I had surgery. Dylan lifted his shirt, showed the scar that ran down his sternum. On my heart. It was sick, but doctors fixed it. Does your heart need fixing too? Harper stared at the scar. Reached out one finger, traced it through the air without touching. Her voice came thin and reedy like wind through broken windows. Mine's broken. Mommy said she'd fix it, but she lied. The words broke something in Victoria. She'd been standing by the door, observing, assessing, keeping professional distance. But that small voice saying she lied cut through every defense she'd built. She crossed the room, knelt beside Dylan and Harper. The girl flinched. Your mommy did lie. I'm sorry she did that, but we're here because we don't lie. We came to help you if you'll let us. You have lots of money. Harper's eyes held no hope, just tired knowledge beyond her years. Yes. Mommy said people with money don't help people without money, they just pretend. Victoria absorbed the hit, deserved it maybe. Your mommy was wrong about that. Sometimes people with money do help. Sometimes they mess up and fail. Sometimes they try again. I want to try again with you, Harper. I want to pay for your surgery and... She hadn't planned this, hadn't discussed it with lawyers or thought through implications. But watching this child who'd been used as a prop in her mother's con, who'd never gotten the help that was supposed to save her. Victoria knew with absolute clarity what needed to happen. And I want to be your family, if you'd like that. After you're better, after the surgery, I'd like you to come live with me, permanently. Marcus's head snapped up. Harper went very still. Like adopted. Yes, like adopted. But you don't know me. Not yet. But I'd like to. Harper looked at Dylan, seeking guidance from the only person in the room who might understand. Dylan grinned. Miss Victoria's house is really big, like a castle, and she orders pizza even though she's rich, and she's learning Photoshop from me. She's actually pretty cool. That almost smile flickered across Harper's face. She looked back at Victoria. Can I bring Mr. Hops? She held up the rabbit. Mr. Hops has to come. He's family too. Okay then. Just like that. Okay then. As if agreeing to surgery and adoption was no more complicated than choosing which toy to bring. Maybe for children it was that simple. Maybe adults were the ones who made everything harder than it needed to be. Marcus touched Victoria's shoulder, drew her aside while Dylan entertained Harper with stories about buttons and adventures they'd have together. Are you sure about this? Adoption is its forever. You can't change your mind. I know what adoption means. Have you thought about what it takes? She'll have trauma from her mother's arrest, trust issues. She'll need therapy, patience, time. You might not. I have time. Victoria's voice held steel. I have money. I have this enormous house with empty rooms. I have everything except someone to share it with. Richard and I spent 10 years wanting a child and never getting one. Maybe this is why. Maybe Harper is who I was supposed to find. Marcus studied her face, searching for doubt or impulse or the desperate need some people had to rescue things because they couldn't rescue themselves. He found none of that, just determination and something that looked like readiness. Then Dylan and I will help however we can. If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone. I thought you quit. I quit being angry. The foundation still needs to exist. Harper proves that. Real kids fall through cracks while we're busy being right or wrong about other things. Victoria felt something unlock in her chest, not forgiveness exactly. They'd both said things that couldn't be unsaid, but maybe forgiveness wasn't required. Maybe just moving forward was enough. The surgery first, then we figure out the rest. Seattle Children's Hospital scheduled Harper's surgery for late May. Ventricular septal defect repair, 8 hours. Estimated surgeon named Dr. Patricia Chen, who had steady hands and 30 years of experience closing holes in children's hearts. Victoria moved Harper to Sterling Manor 2 weeks before surgery for pre-op appointments, and to help the girl adjust. The social worker approved temporary emergency placement given the medical urgency and Victoria's resources. The adoption paperwork would take months, background checks, home studies, but the surgery couldn't wait. Harper moved through the house like a ghost at first, touched nothing, asked for nothing, slept curled tight around Mr. Hops in a bedroom twice the size of her foster home's playroom. Victoria floundered. She'd run a tech company, managed hundreds of employees, negotiated deals worth millions. But she couldn't figure out how to make a 7-year-old eat breakfast or brush her teeth or trust that the bed would still be there tomorrow. Marcus and Dylan came over every evening. Dylan showed Harper his room at home, small and cluttered and full of life, taught her card games and how to draw hearts with wings. Marcus quietly demonstrated routine to Victoria while she watched and learned. Kids need structure. Same bedtime every night, same breakfast ritual. Doesn't matter what the ritual is, just that it's consistent. I can do consistent. And they need to see you eat with them, not just provide food. Sit down, share the meal. Richard and I never ate together, not really. We had the dining room for show, but we ate separately working. Harper needs to see you, needs to know you're real and present and not going to disappear. So Victoria learned, sat at the kitchen island for cereal every morning even though she'd never eaten breakfast before. read picture books at bedtime even though her voice felt awkward and uncertain, enrolled Harper in a child therapist who specialized in trauma, took her shopping for new clothes and let the girl pick out purple everything because that was her favorite color. Slowly, incrementally, Harper began to emerge. Laughed at Dylan's jokes, asked Victoria questions about the big house, admitted she was scared about surgery but glad it was happening. The morning of the operation, Victoria dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, comfortable clothes for a long wait. Harper wore purple pajamas under her hospital gown. Dylan had drawn her a picture, two girls holding hands, both with scars, both with capes. Heart heroes. When you wake up, you'll be like me and Dylan. You'll have a scar that proves you're brave. Harper clutched the picture. Victoria held her other hand. Marcus stood behind them, steady presence. The surgery took 9 hours, longer than expected because the VSD was larger than scans had shown. Victoria paced the surgical waiting room, drank terrible coffee, answered emails without reading them. Marcus sat quietly, Dylan asleep against his shoulder. They'd been here before, knew the weight of waiting, knew how seconds stretched into geological time when someone you loved was under a surgeon's knife. Dr. Chen emerged at hour 9. Scrubs still on, mask pulled down, exhaustion around her eyes, but something else too. Success. Harper did beautifully. The defect is repaired. Her heart will function normally now. She'll need monitoring, but her prognosis is excellent. Victoria's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a chair, hands shaking, tears streaming down her face without permission. Marcus's hand found her shoulder, squeezed. She's going to be okay. Not a question, a statement, a truth they could finally believe. Recovery took 3 weeks. Harper in the ICU for 5 days, then moved to a regular room where Dylan visited every afternoon with new drawings. Victoria never left except to shower at home and change clothes. Slept in the chair by Harper's bed, woke to every monitor beep, learned the rhythms of healing. Harper's first words after waking. Did they fix it? They fixed it. Your heart is strong now. Am I still broken? You were never broken, just needed some help. We all need help sometimes. The girl processed this. Then are you still going to adopt me now that I'm fixed? Victoria's throat closed. She'd forgotten that Harper might think she was conditional. A project to repair, then discard. I'm adopting you because I want you, not because you need fixing. You're my daughter now, Harper. Heart working or not working, you're mine if you want to be mine. Harper reached for Victoria's hand. I want to be yours. Simple as that. The contract made. Mother and daughter by choice instead of blood, which maybe made it stronger. Jonathan's Heart Foundation reopened quietly in July. Same office above the coffee shop, same logo, different protocols. Marcus and Victoria instituted a new system. Every application required 3 levels of approval. Marcus interviewed families in person, assessed credibility. Victoria verified financial and medical information through independent sources. Any case either of them had doubts about got escalated to a third party. A medical social worker named Mackenzie Hartwell, who'd spent 15 years in pediatric hospitals. Mackenzie brought structure and detachment. Early 30s efficient saw systems where Marcus saw people in numbers, where Victoria saw stories. The 3 of them formed a triangle compassion analysis process, each checking the other's weaknesses. They helped 12 children in the next 6 months. Established careful paper trails. Built relationships with hospital financial departments. Created sustainable practices that could scale. But scaling brought its own problems. By January of the following year, applications flooded in. 20 per month became 50. 50 became 127 in April alone. News stories about the foundation had gone viral online. Desperate families who'd exhausted every other option applied in waves. Victoria hired 2 more case managers, rented bigger office space. The foundation that had been personal and small became an organization with staff meetings and board reports and growth charts. Marcus felt it slipping away from them, felt the personal connection that had driven everything getting buried under bureaucracy. He worked longer hours, took every interview himself, refused to delegate the human interaction to people who hadn't sat where he'd sat. The Trevor Donovan case landed on his desk in May. 16 years old, needed a heart transplant. $850,000, the most expensive case they'd considered. Trevor's father worked as an engineer for Boeing. Not poor, not rich, solidly middle class until medical bills destroyed them. Victoria's initial assessment: they can afford this if they sell their house. Marcus's counter: should they have to? Richard didn't ask if we could afford Dylan's surgery if we sold everything. He just helped. We can't help everyone. $850,000 saves one person or helps 4 or 5 others. So we're making cost-benefit analyses on children's lives now. That's what we've become. The argument circled familiar pattern. They'd learned to disagree without destroying each other, but the strain showed. Victoria retreated into numbers. Marcus pushed harder on principles. Mackenzie brokered compromise. They'd approved Trevor's case, but it meant pausing other applications for 2 months to rebuild the budget. Neither Marcus nor Victoria felt good about the decision. Just trapped between impossible choices. Marcus drove home after midnight exhausted, pulled into his driveway in Georgetown and sat with the engine running, trying to summon energy to walk inside. His chest felt tight. Probably stress. Probably too much coffee and not enough sleep. The tightness intensified, became pressure, became pain that radiated down his left arm. He fumbled for his phone. Called 911. Managed to give his address before the world tilted sideways and darkness ate the edges of his vision. Dylan found him collapsed in the truck an hour later when Marcus didn't come inside. The neighbor who watched Dylan after school called the ambulance. Called Victoria because her number was on Marcus's emergency contact list right below Dylan's pediatrician. Victoria arrived at Harborview Medical Center 20 minutes later. Harper in tow because there'd been no time for babysitters. Found Dylan in the ER waiting room, tear-streaked and shaking. Harper wrapped around him, whispering comfort she'd learned from him in her own hospital stay. "Where's my dad? Is he dead? Is he going to die like my mom died?" "He's alive. The doctors are working on him. We'll know more soon." The cardiologist appeared after 90 minutes. Stress-induced angina. Not a full heart attack, but warning signs that couldn't be ignored. Overwork, insufficient sleep, anxiety manifesting as cardiac symptoms. He needed rest, needed to reduce stress, needed to take care of himself before his body made the decision for him. Victoria stood outside Marcus's room after they'd moved him from the ER. Watched him sleep IV in his arm monitor tracking his heartbeat. Thought about Richard working until his last day, dying in his car on wet pavement because he'd never learned to slow down. The pattern was there. Could see it clearly. Marcus running himself into the ground the same way Richard had. Except this time she could stop it. This time she had the power to prevent the loss. She waited until he woke, pulled a chair close to his bed. "You're taking a month off, starting now." Marcus tried to sit up, winced. "The foundation. We'll survive without you for 4 weeks. Mackenzie and I can handle applications. Dylan needs his father alive. Harper needs her Uncle Marcus. I need—" She stopped, started again. "The difference between you and Richard is that Richard had no one to tell him to stop. He worked himself to death because I let him, because we were too disconnected to care about each other's destruction. But we're not disconnected, Marcus. You and Dylan and Harper and me, we're family now. And family doesn't let each other die for a foundation, even a good one. 4 weeks. I can't just— 4 weeks or I fire you, and I'll make it stick. I own the foundation. I can do that." He saw she meant it, saw the fear under the steel, saw that she'd already lost one person to work and wouldn't lose another. What am I supposed to do for a month? Take Dylan somewhere. Road trip, coast, mountains, anywhere that isn't Seattle and doesn't have email. Teach him to fish. Build something with your hands that isn't a deadline. Remember why you stayed alive. Marcus closed his eyes, felt the truth of exhaustion he'd been denying for months. Okay, 1 month, but you have to promise me something. What? Don't let this place eat you too. Don't become Richard. Victoria's smile was sad. I'm trying not to. It's harder than it looks. Marcus took Dylan to the Oregon coast, rented a cabin outside Cannon Beach for a week, then drove down through redwoods. Taught Dylan to skip stones on tide pools, built driftwood forts on empty beaches. Caught nothing while fishing, but Dylan thought it was the best vacation ever. Away from email and applications and impossible decisions, Marcus felt his chest loosen. Could breathe fully for the first time in months. Could sleep without checking his phone at 3 a.m. Could just be dad instead of co-director or savior or any other role that demanded pieces of himself he didn't have to give. Dylan asked questions about Harper, about Victoria, about whether they were really family now or just pretending. Real family, the kind you choose. Like Richard chose us. Yeah, buddy, exactly like that. While Marcus recovered, Victoria restructured, hired Mackenzie as full-time co-director of operations, gave her authority over processes, paperwork, compliance, let her be the bureaucrat Victoria had never wanted to be. Victoria kept strategy and fundraising. Marcus would return to family services, the interviews, the human assessment, the connection that made the foundation matter. The board approved the changes. The foundation had saved 47 children in 18 months, gained enough reputation that major donors were calling. The Seattle Times ran a feature story. A tech billionaire pledged $1 million. They were becoming sustainable. Harper's adoption finalized in September. Judge Parker signed the order making it official. Harper Sterling Callahan keeping her birth name as middle name, taking Victoria's as family. She turned 8 a week later. They threw a party at Sterling Manor, first party the house had ever held. Dylan and Harper wore matching Heart Heroes shirts. 14 kids from Harper's new school showed up. Victoria stood on the deck watching children run through her yard and thought about Richard. About how he'd wanted this house full of life purpose beyond profit, meaning that outlasted success. She'd finally given him what they couldn't build together. Just had to lose him first to find it. Late September brought an envelope from Harrison and Associates, Richard's law firm. Victoria opened it at her desk, expecting another estate matter or tax document. Found instead a letter on partner letterhead. Ms. Sterling, Richard established a safe deposit box to be opened 3 years after his death. The key was held in escrow with instructions to contact you when that date arrived. The 3-year anniversary is October 20th. We've arranged access at Seattle First National for any date convenient to you. 3 years, an age ago and yesterday simultaneously. Victoria called Marcus. Richard left something, timed release. 3 years after his death. Will you come with me to open it? Of course. Dylan and Harper too. I think they should be there. Whatever this is, it involves all of us. They met at the bank on a gray October afternoon, exactly 3 years and 5 days after Richard died. The vault manager led them to a private room, brought the box, left them alone. Victoria's hands shook as she used the key. Inside was a single envelope, thick, addressed in Richard's handwriting. To whoever continues my work, if anyone does. She opened it carefully. The letter was dated October 18th, 2022, 2 days before he died. Do you want me to read it? Marcus's voice came gentle. No, I need to hear his words. She read aloud. Her voice wavered but held. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It also means someone created the foundation I was planning to propose to Victoria, maybe Victoria herself. Maybe a stranger. Either way, thank you. I don't know how I'll die, but I know I'm not ready. There's so much left unsaid, so much left undone. The truth is, I was a coward most of my life. I had everything, money, success, a brilliant wife, but I was empty because I never had the courage to be vulnerable. To admit my failures, to say I need help. Then I met a father and son in a hospital. I didn't know their names at first, just saw a man broken by love, willing to destroy himself to save his child. That kind of love terrified me. Because I'd never felt it. Not for Victoria, not for anyone. I'd loved, but never with that total self-sacrificing abandon. So I helped them, anonymously. Still a coward, still afraid Victoria would see my empty heart. But something changed when I helped that boy. For the first time in years, I felt like my life meant something. Like the money I'd accumulated wasn't just numbers, but tools to change the world. If you're running this foundation, you've learned what I was just beginning to understand. That wealth means nothing if you hoard it. That the point is giving it away to those who need it most. I'm leaving $10 million in a trust, specifically for Jonathan's Heart Foundation. Use it wisely. Save as many children as you can. And if Victoria is reading this, my love, I'm sorry. Sorry for the distance, the silence, the years we wasted. Sorry I was too proud to say I needed you, too scared to admit I'd failed you. You deserved a partner, not a ghost sharing your house. If you've built this foundation, it means you found the boy I helped. Means you learned my secret. I hope you can forgive me for keeping it. And I hope you found what I was searching for, purpose that fills the emptiness. I love you, Victoria. I always did. I just forgot how to show it. To whoever reads this, make every second count. Live well, be kind, and never walk past someone in pain without stopping to help. Yours in hope, Richard Sterling. The room fell silent except for the sound of Victoria crying. Not the controlled tears from the cemetery 3 years ago. Real sobs that shook her shoulders while Marcus held one side and Harper held the other and Dylan pressed close. $10 million. The foundation had operated on Victoria's personal wealth and donations. This trust would sustain them for years, would let them help hundreds of children. Richard's final gift, planned before his death, delivered after it. He was ready to tell you. Marcus's voice was thick. He wrote this 2 days before the accident. He was finally going to be honest. But he ran out of time. Victoria wiped her eyes. He was driving back from somewhere, probably rehearsing what he'd say. And he didn't see the curve or the rain, or she couldn't finish. Didn't need to. They all understood. Richard had been on the cusp of transformation. Had saved Dylan as practice for saving his marriage, had planned this foundation as a way back to Victoria, and died before taking the first step. But his death had accomplished what his life couldn't, had brought them all together, had created the family he'd wanted and the purpose he'd sought. Just not in the way he'd imagined. Harper tugged Victoria's sleeve. "Can we go see Mr. Richard's grave? I want to say thank you." "Yes, let's all go." They drove to Lakeview Cemetery in 2 cars. October afternoon fading into evening, 3 years to the day after Marcus had first knelt in mud with wilted daisies. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. The grave still held a man who'd saved them all without knowing what he'd started. Marcus laid fresh flowers. Daisies again, but expensive ones this time. Victoria added white roses. Harper and Dylan placed drawings, heart heroes flying through clouds. Saving other kids, being brave. Other families started arriving. Word had spread through the foundation's network. parents whose children had been saved, the teenagers themselves, healthy and alive. They came with flowers, with gratitude, with stories of the second chances they'd been given. 47 children, 47 families who wouldn't have to choose between their homes and their kids' lives. And with Richard's trust, hundreds more to come. Victoria stood at the center of the gathering. Harper pressed against her side and spoke to the crowd. Richard Sterling wanted to know if his life meant something. I can answer that now. He changed the world, not through his business or his wealth, but through one choice to help a stranger. That choice created ripples that will never stop. 73 children are alive today because Richard saw Marcus and Dylan and decided to act. Hundreds more in years to come because he had the foresight to plan beyond his death. That's immortality, that's legacy. Marcus added his own words, voice steady with certainty. 3 years ago, I came to this grave to thank a stranger. I'm leaving today with family, with purpose, with proof that goodness exists even in darkness. Richard gave us more than money. He gave us each other. He gave us a reason to be better than we were. They established a tradition. October 20th would be Richard's Day. Annual gathering at the grave, celebration of lives saved, families helped. Not a day of mourning, but of gratitude. As the crowd dispersed as sunset painted Seattle's sky in shades of gold and rose, Marcus stood with Victoria and the kids, their odd assembled family, carpenter and CEO. 2 children saved by the same ghost, bound together by debt that could never be repaid, but could be paid forward forever. Harper held Victoria's hand. Dylan held Marcus's. The 4 of them connected in a chain. Same time next year, Dylan's voice carried the ritual they'd established. Same time every year, Victoria confirmed. Always. They walked together toward the parking lot. Marcus felt the watch on his wrist, Richard's watch ticking forward. Each second a gift, each moment a chance to make different choices than the man buried behind them. The foundation occupied larger offices now, staff of 7, operating budget in millions. Professional operation that bore little resemblance to the scrappy startup they'd launched above a coffee shop. But the mission stayed pure. The hearts they saved stayed real. The families they helped stayed grateful. Marcus had learned to balance, worked 40-hour weeks instead of 80, took weekends off, built furniture in his workshop for pleasure instead of necessity. Dylan thrived in middle school. Harper called him Uncle Marcus and meant it. Victoria had learned to be a mother, still ran her tech company but delegated more, trusted more, left work at work, attended Harper's school events, helped with homework, read bedtime stories even though Harper could read herself now. Became the parent Richard had wanted to be. They gathered at Sterling Manor most Sundays. Cooked together, Victoria learning, Marcus teaching. Dylan and Harper would disappear into the enormous house playing elaborate games. The adults would drink coffee and talk about the week, about challenges, about the careful balance between saving everyone and saving themselves. In the quiet moments, Victoria sometimes pulled out Richard's letter. Read his words about courage and vulnerability, about wealth meaning nothing if hoarded, about love that he'd felt but never shown. She'd forgiven him, not immediately, not easily, but gradually, watching Marcus and Dylan raising Harper, building the foundation into something sustainable she'd understood. Richard had been trying, had been on the path, had run out of time before reaching the destination. That's what mortality meant. You didn't get unlimited chances, you got the moments you had and nothing more. Richard had used his last moments to try changing course, had left money and letters and watches as breadcrumbs for those who came after. Victoria had followed those breadcrumbs to Marcus, to Dylan, to Harper, to a family that looked nothing like what she'd imagined but felt more real than anything she'd had before. Marcus watched his son grow strong and healthy, watched the scar on Dylan's chest fade from angry red to pale silver, watched him become the big brother Harper needed, teaching her resilience and courage, the way only someone who'd survived could teach. At night, taking off the Patek Philippe to wind it, Marcus thought about the man who'd worn it before him. 3 generations of sterling men Richard had written. Now Marcus wore it, a carpenter in a line of businessmen connected by the simple act of seeing someone in pain and choosing to help. He'd teach Dylan that lesson, would pass the watch to him someday, would tell the story of Richard Sterling who'd saved them, and Victoria Sterling who'd built on that salvation. Would say this is what it means to live well, to be kind, to make every second count. The foundation saved its 73rd child in October, 3 years after opening. A girl named Mia Washington, 5 years old, who needed valve replacement surgery. Her mother cried when Marcus interviewed her, told him they'd been rejected by 3 other charities because they made slightly too much to qualify, but not enough to afford treatment. We fall in the gap, too poor to help ourselves, too rich for help. Marcus approved her that day. Victoria verified everything immediately. Mackenzie processed the paperwork. Mia had surgery 2 weeks later. Successful. Another life saved. Another family given hope. Marcus drove past the old workshop in Georgetown sometimes. He'd sold it when the foundation went full-time, moved his tools to a corner of Sterling Manor's basement that Victoria had renovated for him. Occasionally, he still took commissions, custom pieces that demanded his hands and his focus. But mostly he built for pleasure now. Made toys for Harper. Made bookshelves for Dylan's growing collection. Made a jewelry box for Victoria that she kept on her dresser, filled with the watch Richard had given Dylan and the letter Richard had written them all. The world kept turning. Children kept getting sick. Families kept facing impossible choices. But in Seattle, in an office that had grown from 800 square feet to 5,000, Jonathan's Heart Foundation kept answering those impossibilities with possibilities. Not every child could be saved. The math remained brutal. For every application approved, 2 were denied because resources were finite and need was infinite. Marcus and Victoria lived with that weight, learned to carry it without being crushed. Learned that doing some good was better than doing no good, even when it meant saying no to desperate parents who reminded them of themselves. They'd saved 73 lives, would save hundreds more. Each one a ripple in water spreading outward to touch families and futures they'd never see. Each one proof that Richard Sterling's choice to help a stranger had created something bigger than money, more lasting than stone. The watch on Marcus's wrist ticked forward, counting seconds that used to feel endless but now felt precious. Every tick was a child's heartbeat. Every talk was a parent's breath of relief. Every passing hour was another family given the chance they'd almost lost. Richard Sterling died 3 years ago, but his name would be spoken for generations. In hospital waiting rooms where families learned their child could be saved. In foundation offices where staff processed applications. In the hearts that beat strong because he'd chosen compassion over indifference. His legacy wasn't wealth or business success. It was Marcus and Victoria and Dylan and Harper standing together at a grave connected by threads of gratitude and purpose. It was 73 children and counting. It was proof that one person's choice to see and respond to suffering could change the trajectory of countless lives. The rain had stopped 3 years ago, but the growth from that rain continued. Roots deepening, branches spreading, seeds carried on wind to places Richard would never see but would forever touch. That was the gift. That was the answer to his question about whether his life had meant something. Not the money, not the company, not the accolades. Just this people he never met carrying forward the kindness he'd shown, multiplying it endlessly, proving that love, even from strangers, was the most powerful force in the world.